Who would mistake a millionaire for an electrician? And why would he let her? On her first day in a sleek new office, Natalie Dyson thought the biggest challenge would be learning names, not surviving a sudden blackout. But when a man in uniform stepped through the door, what seemed like a moment of rescue became the start of something neither could have predicted. A spark was struck, one that would light up more than just a room. Before we dive into the story, comment below where you're watching from. Enjoy the story, everyone. Natalie Dyson stood frozen in the center of the reception area, her hands hovering uselessly over the lifeless keyboard. The monitor remained stubbornly black despite her frantic tapping. The overhead lights flickered once, twice, then surrendered entirely, leaving the space bathed in pale morning light that seeped reluctantly through the towering glass windows. This wasn't how her first day was supposed to begin. The stylish, high-rise office building had seemed so modern, so efficient, when she'd arrived. Now it felt like a hollow shell, silent except for the faint hum of emergency power somewhere deep within the walls. Her heart raced as she glanced around. The polished floors reflected shadows of furniture, but no reassuring human presence. She bit her lip, debating whether to call someone. But who? The contact sheet she'd been given was somewhere in her locked drawer, and the key, she hadn't even unpacked it yet. Natalie exhaled sharply, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face, and tried to steady herself. The door to the reception swung open just then, and she spun toward the sound, relief surging before she even saw who it was. The figure stepped inside, silhouetted against the brighter hallway, wearing a dark blue uniform with reflective stripes, sturdy boots, and a tool belt slung low on his hips. "Oh, thank God you're here," Natalie said, her voice a mixture of desperation and hope. The man blinked at her, as if trying to place her face, then gave a small, polite nod. "We've lost power, well, most of it. The computers are down, lights out. It's my first day and I don't even know who to call. Could you take a look?" She gestured helplessly toward the darkened workstation, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment at how flustered she sounded. For a heartbeat, Liam Blake considered correcting her. He watched the nervous energy in her posture, the way she clutched at a pen like it might anchor her to reality. He hadn't meant to walk into this scene. He'd come down to check on the lobby redesign plans and see how the team's prototype uniforms felt during actual movement, the weight, the fit, the way the fabric breathed. His company prided itself on authenticity, after all. And now here he was, being mistaken for the very role he was testing. Something about her expression, the earnestness, the quiet panic behind her eyes, made the decision for him. "Sure," Liam said, his voice calm, easy, as if he'd done this 100 times before. "Let's see what's going on." He crossed the space, boots quiet on the marble floor, and crouched beside the workstation. Natalie stepped back, watching as he examined the power strip beneath the desk, fingers brushing over the cord connections. He didn't need to know much about wiring to recognize a loose plug, nor to deduce that the real issue probably ran deeper. The building system was notorious for glitches during the ongoing renovations. "You're new here?" he asked, glancing up with a half-smile. "First day," she admitted, attempting a light tone that didn't quite hide her nerves. "Can you tell?" Liam gave a soft chuckle, shaking his head. "You're doing fine. These buildings have minds of their own sometimes." His ease settled her slightly. He seemed competent, reassuring, and unlike the suits who'd passed through earlier, he didn't look at her like she was an inconvenience. "Did they say when the electricians would arrive?" she ventured, feeling foolish the moment the words left her lips. I think I might be early, Liam said, deadpan, and the spark of humor in his eyes caught her off guard. Oh, her blush deepened. I didn't mean, I just assumed. It's okay, he said gently. Let's try something. He straightened, inspecting the nearby wall panel as if he were diagnosing the entire grid. The truth was, Liam barely registered the wires and circuits. His attention was drawn instead to the way she folded her arms to steady herself, the determined set of her jaw despite the chaos around them. I'm Natalie, she offered after a pause, trying to reclaim a semblance of professionalism. Liam, he replied simply, leaving out the surname that would have shattered the illusion instantly. He tested a switch on the side of the panel, and the lights flickered again, brighter this time, holding for several seconds before stabilizing. The monitor blinked awake, icons appearing like tiny lifeboats on a vast blue screen. Natalie exhaled, the tension sliding from her shoulders. You're amazing, she said, genuine gratitude in her voice. I don't know what I would have done. Glad to help. Liam brushed imaginary dust from his hands, feeling the strange warmth of satisfaction at her smile. A smile meant for someone she thought was a stranger in uniform, not the man whose name was etched into the brass plate beside the front door. He should have excused himself then, left before the charade deepened. But something kept him rooted to the spot. Everything else working? He asked, glancing at the equipment. Natalie tested the phone, nodded, then hesitated. Would it be completely unprofessional if I asked you to stay just a minute? In case, I don't know, the power dies again. Liam smiled, unable to resist. I think I can spare a minute. Outside, the city moved on unaware. Taxis weaving through morning traffic, pedestrians absorbed in their own hurried worlds. But in that quiet lobby, beneath the hum of returning electricity, an entirely different current had begun to flow. If you're still here, you're amazing. Hit like if you love true stories, it helps us keep going. The hum of the monitors blended with the soft whir of air vents as the office slowly settled back into motion. But inside the reception area, time seemed to move differently, stretched between silences and tentative words. Natalie's fingers hovered over her keyboard, not quite typing, not quite idle, while her gaze kept flickering toward the man still leaning casually near the desk. His uniform caught the light, the fabric worn in the way new materials never quite managed. The boots, the tool belt, all of it made sense in this moment. And yet, something about him didn't fit the picture she'd painted in her mind of a typical electrician. I hope this isn't how most of your calls go, she said finally, breaking the quiet with a small, nervous smile. Liam shook his head, his lips tugging into a grin. Only on days that end in Y. She laughed softly, the sound light but genuine. The tension that had coiled in her chest since she stepped into this building that morning loosened, just a little. I'm Natalie, by the way, though I guess that's probably obvious. She gestured vaguely at the nameplate, still wrapped in its protective plastic, propped against the edge of her desk. He glanced at it, then back at her. Nice to meet you, Natalie. I'm Liam. No last name? She teased, trying to keep the mood light. Just Liam today, he said, and there was something in his tone, an edge of amusement, of intention, that made her pause. Well, just Liam, she said, leaning back in her chair. Thank you. I'm not sure what I would have done if you hadn't walked in when you did. Probably called my mom and told her I made a terrible mistake taking this job. He tilted his head, studying her. Bad first day. She hesitated, then shook her head. Not bad, just overwhelming. Big office, big expectations. I thought I'd feel ready. Turns out, not so much. Everyone feels that way the first day, Liam said, his voice low, reassuring. Even the people who act like they don't. She looked at him then, really looked, and saw the kindness behind the easy confidence, the way his eyes softened when he spoke. Caught her off guard. Do you work here a lot? She asked. More than I probably should, he said, glancing toward the hallway beyond. Buildings like this, they always have something that needs attention. She nodded, glancing around at the pristine surfaces, the artfully minimalist decor. Hard to believe. It looks perfect to me. The cracks don't always show on the surface, Liam said quietly, almost to himself. Natalie opened her mouth to reply, but a distant sound, the soft ding of an elevator, drew both their gazes to the glass doors. Probably someone wondering why I haven't reported in yet, she said, half joking but aware of the knot tightening in her stomach again. You've been doing just fine, Liam said, his voice warm, and the knot eased. She hesitated, then gestured at the small table near the window. Would you sit? Just for a minute? I don't know why, but it makes me feel better to have someone here while I'm figuring all this out. Liam didn't even think about it. He crossed the space, lowered himself into the chair opposite her, resting his forearms on his knees. Happy to keep you company, he said. They sat like that for several beats, the city beyond the windows alive with motion, but the room they shared felt suspended, as if carved out from the noise. Where were you before this? He asked. She glanced down at her hands. A small marketing firm. Nothing like this. I left because… I don't know. I wanted to be part of something bigger, I guess. A place that mattered. And is this it? I hope so, she said honestly. Though right now, it feels like I'm just trying not to mess up. You won't, Liam said, and she found herself wanting to believe him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. She studied the skyline, he studied her expression, the way the morning light touched her face. Can I ask you something? She said at last. Of course. Why are you really here? You said buildings like this always need work, but you don't seem like someone who just fixes wires. The question hung in the air between them. Liam considered his answer carefully. Let's just say, he said slowly, I like to see things for myself. It's easier to understand what needs fixing when you're standing right in the middle of it. She nodded as if that made perfect sense. I like that, she said softly. Wish more people thought that way. The elevator dinged again, closer this time, and voices echoed down the hall. I should let you get to your day, Liam said, rising smoothly. She stood too, not wanting him to go but unsure how to ask him to stay without sounding foolish. Thank you again, she said. Really? Anytime, he said. And then, with one last glance that felt like a promise, he turned and walked out, leaving her standing there, the hum of the office filling the space he left behind. The hours that followed unfolded in a blur for Natalie. Faces came and went, introductions layered one atop the other until names blurred into polite smiles and handshakes. The office revealed itself as a hive of motion, voices on calls, the tap of heels against polished floors, printers humming softly as reports spilled into waiting trays. And yet, between the rhythm of this new world, her mind kept drifting to the man who had appeared when everything seemed to be going wrong. Liam. Just Liam. Every time the elevator chimed, every time footsteps echoed near her desk, she half expected to see him again, tool belt slung low, that quiet confidence in his eyes. But it wasn't him. It was never him. By mid-afternoon, Natalie had found her rhythm or something close to it. She answered calls, forwarded emails, took notes during a meeting that seemed to last longer than it should have. Still, beneath her focused exterior, the memory of their brief conversation lingered. His words, his ease, the way he'd stayed just long enough to steady her. And then came the moment that unraveled her certainty. She was returning from the break room, a paper cup of tea warming her palms, when she spotted him, Liam, standing near a cluster of designers reviewing large format prints on one of the tables. Gone was the tool belt. His posture was different too, no longer the casual stance of someone called in to fix a problem. He was focused, engaged, the kind of presence that didn't belong to a contractor or visiting technician. Natalie froze, half hidden by a support column, watching as one of the senior managers leaned in and spoke to him with the kind of deference reserved for someone at the top. Liam nodded, gestured to one of the designs, and the group responded with attentive silence. Her heart thudded in her chest. He wasn't the electrician. He hadn't been from the start. Heat flushed her cheeks as the pieces slid into place. The uniform, the way he'd sidestepped certain questions, the way he'd let her believe what she wanted to believe. Why hadn't he said anything? Why had he stayed, talking to her, sharing those quiet moments, knowing she didn't understand who he really was? A mix of embarrassment and something sharper, betrayal, maybe twisted in her stomach. Before she could think better of it, she stepped forward, driven by the need to bridge the distance between the version of him she'd imagined and the man standing there now. But as she approached, one of the designers glanced up and spotted her. "Everything okay?" the woman asked kindly, seeing the flushed look on Natalie's face. Natalie faltered, realizing Liam had turned at the sound, his gaze meeting hers across the space. For a breath, neither of them moved. Then his expression softened and he gave the smallest nod, as if acknowledging what couldn't be said aloud in that moment. She hesitated, then forced a smile at the designer. "Yes, just getting some air." And she turned, retreating before she could be drawn deeper into the scene. Back at her desk, the tea had cooled to lukewarm. She set it down untouched, fingers tracing the rim of the cup, mind spinning. She told herself she shouldn't care. He hadn't owed her an explanation. They'd spoken for a handful of minutes in the chaos of a first day. But the truth was, she did care. Because in those minutes, she'd let herself believe in the version of him she'd imagined, the kind stranger who'd stayed just to help. And now? Now he was someone else entirely. But even as she told herself to let it go, part of her kept listening for his step, hoping for another chance to make sense of what had passed between them. What she didn't know was that Liam was listening too, listening for the faintest sound of her voice, wondering how he'd managed to complicate something so simple. He told himself it was harmless, letting her believe. He hadn't planned to linger. But there had been something in the way she'd looked at him, not as the man with the title, the millions, the expectations, but as someone real. And he hadn't been ready to give that up. By evening, the office thinned, voices fading as people gathered coats and laptops, preparing to step back into the pulse of the city. Natalie stayed at her desk, tidying notes, filing papers, doing anything to delay the moment she'd have to face the quiet of her apartment and the replay of the day's confusion. She didn't notice Liam approaching until he was standing beside her desk, a faint shadow against the soft glow of her monitor. "Natalie," he said gently. She looked up, heart racing, unable to summon the easy words she wanted. "Can I walk you out?" he asked, his voice low enough that no one else would hear. For a beat, she considered refusing. But something in his expression, the honesty she thought she'd lost, made her nod. They walked in silence to the elevator, the doors sliding closed with a soft chime that seemed to seal them off from the world above. "I owe you an apology," Liam said as they descended. "You didn't have to pretend," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I didn't plan to," he admitted. "But you seemed so sure, and I liked being seen that way. Just for a moment." She glanced at him then, searching his face for the man she'd thought she'd known and finding pieces of him still there. "I should have told you," he added quietly. The elevator doors opened onto the lobby, now hushed in the fading light. "Thank you for helping this morning," she said. And with that, she stepped into the evening, leaving him standing in the doorway, watching her go. But he didn't move, not right away. Because for the first time in a long while, Liam Blake felt the weight of wanting to follow and not knowing how. The night stretched endlessly for Liam, the city lights outside his window flickering against the glass like distant promises he no longer believed in. He told himself the truth would be harmless when it surfaced, that the moment would pass and both of them would smile at the misunderstanding, move on. But as he sat in the silence of his office watching the minutes slide by, he realized how wrong he'd been. What gnawed at him wasn't that she knew who he was now, it was that, for a fleeting moment, he'd been someone different in her eyes, someone not weighed down by title or expectation. And now that was lost. Natalie lay awake too, the faint hum of her refrigerator the only sound in the small apartment she'd tried to make feel like home. The city beyond her window pulsed with life, sirens in the distance, the occasional burst of laughter from the street, but inside all was still. She replayed every word, every look. The way his smile had seemed real. The calm in his voice when the office had been a mess of failing lights and fraying nerves. The part that hurt wasn't that he was the boss. It was that he hadn't trusted her enough to say so. Morning came heavy with clouds, the kind that threatened rain but never quite delivered. The lobby felt different as Natalie stepped inside, less intimidating but no less fast. She moved through the motions of the start of the day, unlocking drawers, sorting files, powering up her computer, but her mind was elsewhere. She told herself not to look for him, not to care. But when the elevator dinged and the doors opened, she felt her breath catch before she could stop it. He stepped out, not in the uniform from the day before, but in simple dark slacks and a shirt, no tie, sleeves rolled once at the cuffs. His gaze found hers almost immediately, and in that moment, the busy lobby seemed to fall away. "Natalie," he said softly, crossing the space between them as if pulled by something he couldn't name. She straightened, forcing herself to meet his eyes. "Can we talk?" There were a dozen reasons to say no. But she heard herself say, "Okay." They walked toward a small side room with glass walls, meant for quick meetings or private calls. Inside, the city hummed beyond the windows, but the room felt separate, like a pause carved out of time. "I owe you an apology," Liam began, his voice quieter than she'd ever heard it. She folded her arms, not to shut him out, but to keep her own emotions steady. "Why didn't you just tell me?" "I should have," he said, meeting her gaze. "When you thought I was the electrician, I meant to correct you. But you smiled, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like just a person. Not the CEO. Not the man people expect things from. Just Liam. And I didn't want to let go of that." Her expression softened despite herself. "But you let me believe something that wasn't true." "I did," he admitted. "And I hated myself for it as soon as I saw how much it mattered. You weren't foolish. I was. I was selfish." Natalie looked down at her hands, then back at him. "It felt easy with you. Real. And then it didn't." "It was real," he said quickly. "At least for me. More real than I've felt in a long time." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of unspoken things filled the room. "I don't know what you want me to say," she whispered. "I don't expect anything," Liam said. "But I couldn't let it end on a lie. I needed you to know the truth from me, not from a nameplate or a rumor." Outside the glass walls, people passed without looking in. The world went on, emails sent, coffee sipped, meetings started. But inside the small room, everything felt still. "I don't know how to look at you now," Natalie admitted. "I keep seeing the man from yesterday. The one who helped. The one who stayed when he didn't have to. And I keep seeing the man who let me believe a story that wasn't real. Both of those are me," Liam said quietly. She shook her head, tears pricking at the edges of her vision. "That's the problem." He took a small step closer, hands at his sides, not reaching for her, just being there. "Let me show you who I am. Not the boss. Not the man in the uniform. Just me." Before she could answer, a knock at the glass made them both turn. A colleague gestured apologetically, reminding Liam of a waiting meeting. Liam exhaled, regret flickering in his eyes. "I have to go." Natalie nodded, unable to find words. But as he reached the door, he paused, looking back. "Thank you for listening." She watched him go, her heart aching with the weight of everything left unsaid. The day dragged on, filled with tasks she barely registered. She answered phones, typed emails, took notes, but her mind kept circling back to that room, to his voice, to the way he looked at her as if waiting for an answer she didn't know how to give. When the office finally emptied, when the city outside softened into evening glow, she sat alone at her desk, staring at the skyline. She didn't hear the footsteps until he was there, beside her again. "Walk with me?" he asked. This time she said yes. The city air felt cooler than Natalie expected as they stepped outside, the hum of traffic mingling with the faint scent of rain clinging to the concrete. She walked beside him, uncertain at first, hands tucked into the pockets of her coat as they moved through streets washed in the gold and silver of evening lights. Liam didn't speak right away. He matched her pace, his silence not heavy but patient, as if waiting for the right moment rather than forcing one. They passed storefronts closing for the night, the clatter of security grates and soft murmur of final customers drifting through the air. The rhythm of their steps settled into something easy, natural. Natalie realized she wasn't as tense as she'd been hours ago in that glass-walled room. Finally, Liam broke the silence, his voice quiet but sure. "I don't know where this is going. I don't know what happens next. But I know I don't want a day to end with us standing on opposite sides of a lie." She glanced at him, seeing the honesty in his eyes. "I didn't want that either. But I didn't know how to change it." "You just did," he said, offering the faintest smile. They stopped at a small park, empty except for a woman in a red scarf walking her dog along the far path. The bench beneath the old oak tree was dry despite the earlier rain, and Liam gestured for them to sit. Natalie hesitated, then lowered herself onto the worn wood, watching as the city pulsed beyond the fence, alive and distant all at once. "I kept thinking about what you said," Liam continued, leaning forward, elbows resting on his knees. "That you saw both of me, the man who helped and the man who didn't tell the truth. And you're right. I'm both. I've spent so long being the version people expect, I think I forgot how to just be myself." Natalie looked down at her hands, fingers tracing the edge of her sleeve. "I wasn't angry because you're the boss. I was angry because for a moment I thought I'd found something real. And then I felt like it slipped through my fingers." His breath caught at that, the rawness of her words. "It wasn't fake. Not for me." "I want to believe that," she said, her voice low. "Then let me prove it," Liam said. "Let me show you who I am when no one's watching, when there's nothing to win, nothing to gain. Just me. Just this." The wind stirred the leaves above them, carrying the scent of damp earth and city stone. Natalie lifted her gaze to his, and in that moment, the noise of the world seemed to dim. "I don't want promises," she said. "I don't have any left to give," he admitted. "Only honesty." They sat there as the city deepened into night, as the lights brightened and the world moved on without them. Neither needed to speak more, not yet. The connection between them was fragile but real, a thread spun from what they'd risked by showing who they truly were. In the days that followed, Liam found reasons to be near without intruding. A shared coffee run. A quiet nod in the hallway. Small moments that weren't grand gestures, but steady, honest ones. Natalie, in turn, let her walls lower by inches. A smile that lasted longer. A question asked not out of duty but out of wanting to know. They didn't rush it. Neither wanted to shatter what was slowly being built. One evening, as the office emptied and the city's heartbeat filled the windows, Liam appeared at her desk with a small, plain notebook. He set it down without a word, his fingers lingering on the cover for a breath before he stepped back. Natalie opened it later, alone, and found no speeches, no declarations, just pages of small, handwritten notes. Observations. Hopes. Things he'd noticed that made him pause, that made him remember how to look at the world as more than numbers and deadlines. And at the end, a single line, "If you're willing, I'd like to write the next pages with you." She closed the notebook, heartful in a way she hadn't expected, and realized she wasn't standing on opposite sides of anything anymore. They were, at last, facing the same way. Hit that subscribe button and let us know in the comments what you'd do in a moment like this. We love hearing from you.